Dear participants, welcome to the Roundtable on Food Loss and Waste Prevention and Reduction. Before we get started, let me share some housekeeping rules. The Roundtable is part of the Working Party on Agricultural Quality Standards. And we would like to have this is the portion of the meeting that is more open, and we would like to have it as interactive as possible and welcome your questions and comments. Please use the chat for questions and comments. And then we will channel questions to the moderator for the Q&A part. Please also note, I think you might have heard that it is recorded. If any of the speakers would have a problem with that, let us know afterwards. If not, we might upload the recording later on the website. And the PowerPoints will be shared with participants online after the event. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our opening speakers, Ms. Agnieszka Sudol, Chair of the Working Party on Agricultural Quality Standards, followed by Ms. Elizabeth Tuerk, Director of Economic Cooperation and Trade Division, who will also moderate the roundtable. Agnieszka, please.
Thank you, Merit. Good morning. Welcome all delegates and speakers to the Roundtable on Food Loss and Waste Prevention and Reduction. This event is organized on the occasion of the session of Working Party and Agriculture Quality Standards. Over the past few years, the Working Party has increased focus on improving sustainable production and trade, particularly through its focus on the prevention of food loss and waste. Indirect support of Sustainable Development Goal target number 12.3 on halving food loss by 2030. The work has included the organization of awareness-raising events and the development of studies, tools and guidelines document, including the UNEC Code of Good Practice, the UNEC Food Loss and Waste Measuring Methodology for Fresh Produce Supply Chain, and the development of a minimum quality specification for fresh fruit and vegetables. The aim of this roundtable is to take stock of work done, hear of work by related organizations, and discuss potential action going forward. The roundtable is open to wider participation. Following this roundtable, the Working Party will discuss and decide on its future work, including in relation to food loss and waste. I wish you an interesting roundtable and fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Agnieszka, for those opening remarks. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Elizabeth Tuerk, Director of Economic Cooperation and Trade Division of ECE, who will also be moderating the roundtable. Elizabeth, please.
Many thanks, Madam Chair. Many thanks, Secretariat. Great pleasure for me to be here this morning for that roundtable. I understand we have some 2 hours devoted to this discussion, and it will surely be an interesting and fruitful one. Madam Chair, you've already nicely outlined how this roundtable fits into the agenda of this Working Party meeting. Let me maybe stress 2 or 3 points very quickly. First of all, the importance of reducing food loss and waste. And if we know, or if we look at the natural resources that are being used, productively used for agriculture, in 70% of fresh water, for example, 2/3 of nitrogen, and 30% of human-caused greenhouse gas emissions are linked to agriculture. So both on the input side in terms of natural resources, but also in terms of like the environmental challenges being created. Agriculture is significant. And when we then think about the amount of food that is being lost or wasted in the value chain, that amounts to quite significant sort of shares if we think about the greenhouse gas emissions that basically didn't come to any productive use. So clearly, when we manage to reduce food loss and waste, we can sort of harvest a triple win: a win for environment, a win and climate here, a win for food availability, and a win for incomes. And so I think the idea here really is to look at agriculture as a hugely, hugely important sector in terms of feeding the world, creating jobs, creating economic activity, and seeing how we can avoid waste in this regard. And so I'm very pleased that we can have the discussion here today. If we think about food loss and waste, quite a lot of discussions are really centering on the consumer level. So today we are not doing that. We are not looking at how we as consumers can maybe make sure we finish all we buy and not waste it in our kitchen. We are looking more at the value chain part of it. At the early part of the value chain, what can be there done to reduce food loss and waste? Madam Chair, as you said before, the roundtable is part of Working Party 7, but it's a much more open format. But the idea really is that the discussions of this roundtable sort of inform deliberations by member states as you will be deciding on our future work. And here just to recall that indeed Working Party 7 has already worked on food loss and waste. On the one hand, the Code of Good Practice and the methodology. So we have excellent work to build on, to base on. And in the Secretariat, we are also working on food loss and waste as part of our technical assistance. And I'm delighted to have the circular economy team with us in the room. They have been to Serbia earlier the year where we are working together with Serbia as one of our beneficiary countries in terms of what the country can do to develop a circular economy roadmap where really food loss and waste are taking center stage. So all of that, from my perspective, it fits together very, very nicely. Now, what do we do in the roundtable? We have two types of interventions, and we start off with 4 maybe sort of interventions that are a little bit longer and that set the picture. And for that, we will be joined by an academic, Mr. Shane Ward, who is Professor of Biosystems Engineering at the University College Dublin. He's really an expert on food loss and waste related issues, and Professor Ward has been with us already in earlier roundtables and in some of our technical assistance work, and we really look forward to hearing from him. We will then be joined for another sort of 10 minutes presentation by Ms. Camelia Bucatario, who is international consultant with FAO. So delighted to have with us one international player who is really sort of like central to all the work on food loss and waste. And warm welcome to Camelia here. And then we will hear from 2 speakers who share perspectives of their particular countries. We'll hear from Zeynep Özkan, who is head of European Union Harmonization Department in the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry in Turkey. So clearly, surely a very interesting contribution from the country coming up here. And then we'll move further north in UNECE membership to Ms. Kristina Mattsson, who is agricultural policy analyst at the Swedish Board of Agriculture. So I think we have a lovely combination of academic, international organization, and country perspectives, both from the government and on the private sector side. Afterwards, and I'll take the speakers in that order. Afterwards, we'll turn to contributions from Working Party 7, specialized sections, and we'll hear from Mr. Cyril Julius, who is the chair of the specialized section on standardization of fresh food and vegetables. Then from Mr. Dorian Lafont, and Dorian, thank you for being with us here in the room, specialized section on standardization of dry and dried produce. Hannah Kortema, chair of the specialized section on standardization of seed potatoes, and last but not least, Ian King, chair of the specialized section on standardization of meat. So it's really an opportunity for the 4 specialized sections operating under Working Party 7 to react to complement to the remarks we have heard in our introductory speeches. So with this, maybe no need for any further explanatory remarks at the beginning. And I would give the floor to Shane and ask the tech team whether we managed to put Shane on the screen, hear him. I can see already Shane. And if you have any slides, we need to jump that hurdle. But with that, Shane, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Director Tursk. And I'm very pleased to be present here today, virtually, of course, to present what I would consider to be a sort of an overview of issues relating to the full agri-food chain, starting at the farm level, moving right through the system and into the bioeconomy. And just at the outset to state that the whole issue of food loss, food waste, efficiency in relation to the agri-food chain is in fact very complex. At face value, it may appear to be simple. It is far from simple and is a real existential issue for mankind. So that's sort of my starting remark. I'm Professor of Biosystems Engineering at University College Dublin in Ireland, and our group specializes in various aspects relating to the agri-food systems and agri-food chains. Next slide, please. So I just want to set out a few starting principles. Next. The global productive agricultural land resource is limited. That's a fact. Next. And the primary use of this land is to produce food, not biofuels. Next. It is not a function of the circular economy to solve social justice and deprivation issues, for example, via food banks. These are best addressed via social policy. Next. So a few starting principles. Unavoidable waste, that is, byproducts of an efficient system, are an inherent part of food production process. For example, animal manures, inedible plant and animal components. They are in effect byproducts. They are valuable in terms of products that can be recycled back into farming and or can be used as feedstocks for a bioeconomy. However, the reality is that inefficiencies in the production process lead to additional avoidable wastes. And modern agri-food systems are oil-based. That is, we rely on oil-derived inputs to maintain current output. So in fact, we are caught in a dilemma. We cannot feed the world without these oil-derived inputs. So we are hooked on oil for the foreseeable future. And it is essential that resource use efficiency, therefore, is top of the agenda. Next slide. And a few home truths. Transition to a sustainable circular bioeconomy is not painless. It is very disruptive. And technocratic solutions alone cannot deliver. You must address the systemic social, ecological, and political dimensions. The biosphere is reaching, and perhaps has reached, its limit in relation to sustaining further economic growth. And we must bring our overall footprint of human activities within the biophysical boundaries of the Earth. And for example, the EU's material footprint per capita is estimated to be in the region of 50 tons per annum, whereas the sustainable level is perhaps 1/5 of that or less. Next slide. So if we look at food, next. Food, on the one hand, we recognize as obviously the commodity we eat. Next slide, next. However, in looking at food, we need to consider the resources, next, that were used to produce the food. Next. So we really need to look on food, not just as food per se, but also when we eat food to consider to produce that food, there were very significant levels of resources put into the production of that food. That might seem an obvious thing, but it's something that in fact people tend to ignore. Next slide. So food is a resource-intensive commodity and therefore should not be wasted. Yet half the food produced globally is wasted. The main food waste in the Western world occurs post-farm gate, that is the consumer. But however, pre-farm gate should not be ignored because it's not as efficient as it is presented. There are major resource use inefficiencies, for example, overuse of fertilizers, significant below potential performance, and so forth. So it's not just about food losses and waste, it's also about production foregone due to inefficiencies and valuable input resources wasted. Next slide. This schematic gives an overview of the full agri-food chain. Next. And one must take a full systems-based approach. So it's the agri-food chain, not the food chain, it's the agri-food chain from farm to consumer and beyond. So it doesn't end at the consumer, goes beyond into a bioeconomy. Next. Efficiency is absolutely paramount. Remember I said earlier, food is a high input resource commodity. One cannot waste it. Next. So that ring there essentially delineates the production system on the farm, the processing of the food, the retail. Next. And of course, the citizen, the consumer, drives all of this, drives it. And I purposely say drives because demand is dictated by the consumer, not by the farmer, not by the supermarkets. It is the consumer ultimately who drives this system. And that system, production-wise, on the farm, and also from the point of view of processing and ultimately delivering the product to the consumer, has to be as efficient as possible. Next. And there are unavoidable wastes in an idealized world that can be used and as a result of the production system, and these can be recycled back into the farm. For example, fertilizers. Next. Building a bioeconomy, biochemicals, etc., on top of this is a very worthwhile, and it also produces high value added. However, the input feedstock needs to be those that are unavoidable. In other words, you minimize waste in the production system on the farm and throughout the chain. And ultimately, if you have an efficient system, the inputs to the bioeconomy will be, in effect, byproducts of that system, or, if you like, unavoidable waste. Continue. Next. And again, the same applies to water, biomass, and biofuels. Next. So in summary, the center circle, that has to be very efficient. If that's efficient, then it can feed all those satellites, as it were, with resources that are, in effect, byproducts of that system. Next, please. Just a little bit of history, local versus global. In the 19th century, local could provide the needs of mankind. It's not so now. It's overwhelmingly global. Global is necessary to meet the demand, and local has niche roles. For example, in the 1950s, the population of the world was about 2.5 billion. However, now, of course, it's 3 times that and increasing. And lifestyle was far more frugal then. So both population and lifestyle have grown, putting major demands on food production. It is simply not possible to feed the world based on a local food production system. That is not to say that local does not have a role to play. It does, but the overwhelming focus needs to be on global, but efficient global production. So we've had an unprecedented rate of growth in demand for food, population growth, wealth driven, that's a huge issue, massive sociological change, again, a huge issue, ongoing changes in dietary preferences, and of course, people's expectations, their choice and more choice. And all of those come together in a confluence, as it were, to put major pressure on global food production systems. Next slide, please. Global markets respond dynamically. In agri-food, if agri-food output is curtailed in one country, the global market, in response to demand by consumers, will source supplies elsewhere. That's a simple fact. So I contend that if ill-conceived, and I use that word purposely, ill-conceived environmental policy forces efficient agricultural systems to reduce output in one country, the global market will look elsewhere. For example, culling beef herds in the most efficient beef-producing countries due to national greenhouse gas targets, which is currently happening, forces the global market, which responds to consumers, that is the citizen demand, to seek supplies from less efficient countries. Consequently, global greenhouse gas emissions increase per unit of beef produced. It's a classic case of shooting yourself in the foot, and that is ongoing. Next, please. So a global policy is really needed. You cannot ring fence greenhouse gas emissions to a geographic location. Gases move globally. Setting national greenhouse gas targets can't deal with this. A global policy is required, or at least a Western world policy would be a good start. The price of food should reflect its environmental impact. Less efficiently produced food should attract higher environmental levies. This will encourage the most efficient producers globally, lowering greenhouse gas emissions per unit of food produced. That is just one dimension that may be considered. But overall, you need a coherent global policy that takes account of the way the markets respond to a decrease in supply from one source. They will look elsewhere. Next, please. Food waste is people-driven. It is driven by lifestyle, for example, obsession with best before dates. The traditional clean your dinner plate mantra no longer prevails. Wealth in the Western world, food is too cheap. That may seem a strange thing to say in these days with massive inflation happening as we speak. However, food is still too cheap. Lack of awareness of the consequences of waste is a major issue. A widely held sense or opinion that wasting food doesn't matter if one thinks the waste is being used for a useful purpose, for example, for bioenergy, food banks, biomaterial, etc., and so on. So it's a wide range of issues that affect the consumer in terms of their decision-making process. Next, please. So a warning in that regard is that creating a market for food waste can exacerbate the waste problem. Next slide, please. And this here highlights this. Next, please. In this particular one, if you have an inefficient system, that in effect means you will have a high volume of waste produced, and the waste is of little value. So you're in box number 2. Then if you improve efficiency, next, please, you move to the left. In other words, you reduce the amount of waste. The product is still worth very little, but your overall system has become more efficient with less waste. Next, please. So you're now in that box, number 1. Next, please. Then, with this source of waste, one will obviously look at, are there potential markets for this waste? Next, please. And therefore, there's a tendency to move gradually to box 3 and ultimately to box 4. Box 4 basically means that you are getting a high value for your waste product, and that tends to leave the purchaser looking for new sources of product. In other words, the overall efficiency tends to reduce. So you're going back to high levels of production in terms of waste simply because the value of the product is such that it makes sense not to get too concerned about efficiency. So that, next please. So you end up with what I describe as sort of the tail wagging the dog scenario. Next, please. In terms of overall impact, socioeconomic is hugely important. And the final box on that slide says, far greater impact than any technological solution. That might seem a bit strong of a statement. However, if you look at all of the technological solutions that are out there, the one thing that drives their ultimate uptake is the citizen. And I'll just give you one example of a project we were involved in called AgroCycle, a Horizon 2020 project that produced this product called AgroCycle Kids. Essentially, the concept was to start young, to embed this type of concept of the circular economy in primary school education. The ultimate idea being long-term impact. These would be the post-2030 adults. So I would contend that the whole area of education is hugely important and is a main driver. In fact, probably more so than technological solutions. Technological solutions, of course, are needed, but their uptake is contingent upon acceptance by society at large. Next, please. So some key messages in conclusion. Food is produced through an integrated agri-food chain from farm to kitchen and beyond into the bioeconomy. More efficient farming systems produce lower greenhouse gas emissions per unit of output and have lower food losses at farm level. Agri-food chains are driven by the consumer, that is the citizen. It's a global food market with local nuances. I sort of related to the Swiss watch with many small cogs, but overall the system has to work in an integrated manner. One needs to change citizens' awareness, educating the young, the next generation, the post-2030 consumers and decision makers. I believe that is probably one of the channels that one can use to get the biggest single impact. Avoid creating a market for waste per se. Only use unavoidable waste streams as feedstock for a bioeconomy. Now, the truth is, of course, you will never get an idealized system, but the trend needs to be towards unavoidable waste. Use social policy to deal with social justice and deprivation issues. And globally informed policy is required to support efficiency and sustainability. Next slide. Thank you very much. I hope that gives a reasonable overview of, let's say, issues relating to this. They're all quite complex, and the whole system, as I've indicated, has to be addressed in a fully integrated way from farm right through to the consumer and beyond into the bioeconomy. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Shane, and many thanks, Professor Ward, for this very comprehensive overview. I realize we've gone quite over time, significantly over time, but I think it was very valuable to hear this comprehensive explanation of the challenge we are facing. And without any attempt to summarize, just like 3 things that really struck me is you mentioned how important resource use efficiency is, and it should be on top of our agenda. But you also said, like, when we talk efficiency of agri-food chains, it's everything else than simple. So I guess we have a topic here where lots of discussions ultimately will be required, and where surely there will be one or the other way for Working Party 7 to contribute. Shane, you also emphasized the importance of taking a systems approach, and that leads me to two thoughts. On the one hand, the really significant role of international trade, where, you know, in this global system, international trade can really help us feed the world, feed the people, provide nutritious diet to everybody. But the systems and interaction also mean that policies we put in place in one country have repercussions on many things. And the example you gave on the environmental policy side, the national greenhouse gas targets are I think, an interesting one here. And last but not least, you emphasized the role of consumers. And even if today we are not looking at the consumer part of the food loss and waste story, I think it's something that each of us can take home with and can sort of be guided by in our day-to-day action. So many thanks, Shane, again for this huge and comprehensive presentation. And I guess as an academic, you also had the benefit of making some statements that are maybe debatable or where different views could be sort of voiced. And I look forward to sort of other speakers also picking up on your points and the audience as well. Let me with that move to our second speaker, together with a request to maybe watch time a little bit. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Camelia Bucatario, who is international consultant with FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization. And with you, Camelia, we really have an expert who is right at sort of the center in an international organization where lots of the food loss and waste work is happening. I guess you will maybe also provide us with some data and statistics, and very curious to hear. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for organizing this event. It's really useful and timing, and the timing is very, very useful as well. And thank you very much to the participants and Professor Ward that presented before, because indeed some points will be linked to my presentation. So let me start. Next slide. Indeed, so one of the key points that perhaps are common with the previous presentation is the systems approach. Indeed, for the organization FAO, we have a food systems approach that considers food loss and waste as being part of the food system from production up to consumers, households, and waste management services. And the impacts are considered to be social, economic, and environmental. Now, because we are in the context of Agenda 2030, we are aware that there is the SDG 12.3 addressing directly food loss and waste. However, this SDG is in the context of Agenda 2030. So the linkages with the life underwater, for instance, better cities, less hunger, equality in education, access to education as well, are linked to SDG 12.3. Various aspects of it. However, we are aware that by contributing to SDG 12.3, we also are supporting the realization of other SDGs, as I said. Now, next slide, please. A quick overview on the progress of the work, because we have indeed much progress since 2015, since the launch of SDG 12.3. With this overall global agenda of the Agenda 2030, we have been through a time of data collection and analysis that allowed us to have the indices for food loss and waste published. So in 2019, FAO has published the first global estimates, the food loss index, as the sub-indicator that tracks progress on food loss. And then in 2021, UNEP has produced the food waste index. Now, both of these indices show, let's say, massive amounts of total food produced that is being lost or wasted globally. However, at the same time, these indices have uncovered significant gaps in data collection and analysis, both from the perspective of nations that are not yet in the position of collect and analyze and then report. However, also the academia has huge opportunities to improve on that. And while this is done, we still have to, let's say, work around these uncertainties. Nevertheless, uncertainties left aside, we are aware that food loss and waste is a huge problem with huge impact. Next slide, please. So one of the achievements that we realized is to have a global definition on food losses. Up until 2019, when the first food loss index was produced, there was no definition at global level on food losses. Now, there is this definition that refers to quantities that completely exit the post-harvest slaughter production system and do not enter any other utilization. So this is something that it can be considered a success at global level. Now, even though we have this definition, we still have to bridge the gap between having this definition at global level and then producing the data from countries or academia, as I said, reflecting this definition, because we still have data comparability issues to deal with. Nevertheless, the food loss index applied this definition and will continue to do so. And the food waste index also has produced a food waste definition. And we have also the food supply chain definition, because when we talk about impacts, social, economic, and environmental, we have the overview of data. And then we also have the view of the overview of the analysis at food supply chain level in order to decide, for instance, better investments. So we at FAO have worked around these different level of analysis, and we have also produced a definition that is applicable for food supply chain level analysis. And these refer to commodities at each step of the food supply chain that may also be analyzed through their nature, either edible or unedible, and can be, let's say, tracked through their other utilization. So this is also some way different than the food loss definition for the index. However, it allows a closer supply chain analysis for a closer understanding of what investments are needed. Next slide, please. Now, either from the perspective of a national strategic approach or a food supply chain level analysis, we have the choice between going from reduction of bio-waste, so increasing the efficiency of waste management, for instance. In urban areas around the globe, there is this huge challenge on reduction of the waste, and bio-waste generally is considered to be the largest category. So we have the bottom-up approach, and at the same time, the choice can also be from top-down, let's say, from accessibility and affordability of food through the prevention at source of food losses and waste, and through recovery and redistribution of what could be at risk to become waste. So in different contexts around the globe, we have noticed that depending on the policy perspectives that are being taken on the interest of the private sector to invest, or even the pressures that civil society can exert, actions can be taken either way. So this is something to consider. It does not depend whether you have perfect data that can be, let's say, circumvented while work is being done on awareness raising. So it doesn't matter if you have, for instance, the perspective of environmental concerns such as bio-waste or food security. You can, in each of these contexts, take action for prevention and reduction of food loss and waste. Next slide, please. So this is the way we approach the work and monitoring of it. We have from on-farm harvest up to processing and packaging, excluding, so wholesale including, but excluding retail. We have the food loss index. And then from the retail up to consumption households, we have the food waste index. Now, both of these indices track progress. They follow the different steps of the food supply chain, and an overview of these two indices at country level allows us to understand how the country positions itself for their utilization of food, either it is imported, locally produced. And this is also a point to consider, given also the presentation beforehand, because we would like to strive for utilization efficiency rather than transferring greenhouse gases, for instance, to other parts of the world. Next slide, please. This is the first food loss index data, I'm sure we are quite aware that that are striking. Different regions have different commodities that rank highest in their food loss and waste levels because of the different type of context that we are working in. Climate can be a factor, a cause, capacity to access, for instance, food packaging, the infrastructure of storage or roads. All of these factors can influence the level of food losses and waste. However, all regions deal with the same issues, even though the different causes can impact it differently. Next slide, please. Now, an overview of the causes of the impacts and the awareness rate by FAO, by state and non-state actors from 2015 up to 2018 allowed the country members of the FAO to request a guidance that would lead some of the considerations around the interventions. And in 2018, country members of FAO requested FAO to have an overview, a code of conduct that will guide implementation. Now, this work from 2008 took place by FAO. It was supported by FAO technically and took place from 2018 up until 2021 to deliver the code of conduct on food losses and waste. The overview objective was to facilitate joint action and harmonization of approaches. As I said before, the definition, the monitoring and evaluation of data, some of the interventions, so scaling up solutions that are already available. This was the approach taken to deliver the code of conduct. Next slide, please. Now, frameworks, policies, regulations are referred to for the government actors. So the governmental actors can take the lead to establish, for instance, platform of dialogue. This would be in context where no action was taken. This would be, let's say, the beginning, the starting point to talk about the issue. And then the code of conduct would allow further discussion and considerations that are context-based. Now, there is also a role foreseen in this code of conduct for development agencies and international financial actors, because investments are always needed, even more so when we talk about the increase in efficiencies, for instance, for natural resources such as water or energy. Of course, now, because we talk about food loss and waste, the main actors that are in the position to do something about it is the private, so are represented by the private sector actors, the food business operators. That can be supported as well by academic and research institutions. Now, FAO is providing technical support, whether it is state or non-state actors, or a combination of these two. Next slide, please. Now, for instance, we have worked with countries such as Ukraine, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan. And in all these countries, even though priorities may differ, even though policies and regulatory frameworks may differ, we have the common approach of the analysis of national legislations and policies, combined with field level studies and surveys to map whatever data are available and useful for understanding of the topic. And then we have consultations for validation of the results involving private sector, civil society, and local authorities, along with central governments. And the technical support is based on this type of approach. So activities that are implemented in this phase then led to how these countries that I have given example for now then decided to go ahead in their action plans around food loss and waste. Next slide, please. Now, the governance overall, so either it is a law or a policy or any other tool, may differ from cases to case. So it's issues, concerns, maybe, for instance, mainly referring to food safety and hygiene standards for production level. Or if we talk about food banks or any other redistribution, let's say, network, food labeling, communication to consumers, or taxes may be a challenge. Now, secondary uses, animal feeding, composting, energy recovery, is an area that raises interest in many contexts. However, indeed, there is something to agree with from the next presentation, because some contexts have already assessed that giving a market for resources such as food waste indeed may increase the pressure to have that resource for those markets. So there is a very thin line that we have to consider to set the system boundaries that are needed to be set before taking action in some of these areas, such as animal feeding, composting, and energy recovery. Now, let's say the clarifications that are needed to take place generally refer to regulatory measures. The regulatory measures need to be clarified. Either they are in place, so we need to specify for the topic of food waste what you are referring to as resource, so that you don't go into competition with food security when you talk about utilization of food. Or if the regulatory framework does not yet have the terminology in place, you can go into a process of revision and integration if the government is interested in this type of approach, in order to prevent the risk of having competition between these different utilizations that food may have. We are not talking about waste, because once food is classified as waste, it cannot go, for instance, into animal feeding or any other purposes that are related to this. However, a classification of what is food waste, what can be food waste, is needed in many of the countries that we go and technically support. Now, some of the gaps, as I said, can be this, let's say, can take place to clarify action. Next slide, please. Now, a very concrete example where you can make progress is there was this conference that took place in October in Turkey. And it was a hybrid event. Many actors participated from all over the region, Europe and Central Asia, to work around issues such as the enabling environment and associated tools with this, including legislative and business innovation and social innovation, and then to discuss the strategies and action plan that were already in place. So this conference, for instance, hosted by the government of Turkey and in Istanbul, actually allowed all participants, virtual or face-to-face, to share their solutions, because this is something that we should consider at first. Solutions are there, already available. What are the solutions that are applicable in the way that we, as actors, each in our role, can do something about it? So it's a matter of now, it's more of a matter of selection of what we are able and we are willing and we, in our context, can do, rather than identification as such of the solution. Next slide, please.
Camelia,
Now,
I'm gonna take the moderator's prerogative here a little bit. It's super interesting, and particularly also what you told us about the conference on Central Asia just before. I see there is still a lot of slides. Maybe you want to pick one or two key messages, yes, so we also can hear from the other presenters.
Definitely.
Back to you. Thank you.
All right. All right. So we have regional efforts in Europe and Central Asia. However, we have Asia and the Pacific as well with the regional strategy. Next slide. And also Near East and North Africa with a regional strategy and a consultation. So it's a global topic going ahead strongly, inviting all those that are able to do something about it, interested to do something about it, to also reach out to organizations such as FAO for technical support. Next slide, please. Now the case studies, next slide. Next. The case study, I wanted to mention it to you because it's a tool already available, already tested, already produced results at food supply chain level. So all participants in this event, if they are interested, for instance, to know better how supply chains are behaving, what operations are having critical loss points to be addressed, investments can be decided based on this tool. It was already tested, produced results, and has driven action in several key commodities for several countries. So I invite you to consult this tool. Next slide, please. This tool will allow you, as I said, the analysis at food supply chain level. It's extremely informative. Next slide. This is the type of result that you can get. So as a decision maker, you will have a clear picture of where loss occur, why, and how actually you can reach the best cost-benefit analysis. Next slide, please. As we are aware, a reduction of food waste impacts directly greenhouse gas emissions reduction. Next slide, please. And mitigation and adaptation of climate change has several measures that can be through the entry point, can be addressed through the entry point of loss and waste reduction, from critical control point systems in the food supply chains or good manufacturing practices to improve harvest and storage. Next slide, please. This is the database. You can all contribute to the database that FAO hosts. It has several thousands of data points on food losses and waste. However, it is still very much in its infancy. So all studies that are being produced, all data that are being gathered and analyzed is useful for us to consider how to integrate it in this database in order to have a more complete overview of what is being done and what knowledge is being produced along the food supply chains and at systemic level for food losses and waste. So I invite you to consult with your team, for instance, on what data are available, and perhaps also communicate to us, and we can work together around integrating the data that you have into this database. Next slide, please. We are all aware that there is this International Day on Awareness, and I invite you, of course, to keep on celebrating it each year, and the activities can be decided as well together with FAO and other partners. Next slide, please. These are some resources. So this is my presentation. Thank you very much again for your patience and the timing that, as I said, was very key to have this discussion today. I'm aware that many questions may be addressed, so I'm here for replying to anything that I may be aware of. Thank you.
Thanks, Camelia, for having been with us and for staying with us. And I guess what is clear to everybody is really the richness of the tools and information that FAO has available on this topic. And it's really great to have you as a partner here in the event and to also join hands in the issue-based coalition on sustainable food systems. Maybe just 3 quick points. I really liked how you framed it all in the SDG context from a UN perspective. That's really, really crucial for us as well. I was super intrigued by the different indices and the bar chart you had for the regions. And if I remember correctly on your slide with the bar charts, Asia, including Central Asia and North America and Europe, the regions we are dealing with in UNECE, they were not doing particularly well. So that's maybe also a sort of like call to action for all of us to think what we can do. And I also found really interesting what you said in terms of the code that you presented, and I understand that's more like a cross-cutting code. So the code of good practice that the fresh fruits and vegetables specialized section has been developing and that we are using here also in Working Party 7. I guess that's sort of like a sector-specific contribution or implementation or support also to this cross-sectoral work stream. So surely lots of interactions. Thank you for staying with us, Camilla. Now, let me turn to Zeynep, and Zeynep Özkan, who is head of the EU Harmonization Department at the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry in Republic of Turkey. And Zeynep, now I will have to ask you to watch the time a little bit, but we are very, very keen to hear from you. And we just also heard like Turkey hosted an international conference on that. So please, with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I would like to also thank you, Professor Shane, and of course, Camelia, that we always worked very closely together. So I'm going to share my screen now and start my presentation. I just want your confirmation that you see it in full screen and it is moving. So right now you should see the food loss and waste numbers in Turkey. I guess.
Been moving.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. So this is Zeynep Özkan. I'm from the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry of Turkey. I'm the head of department for the EU harmonization, but also the project coordinator for our lovely campaign, Save Your Food, which means Gıdanı Koru in Turkish, to prevent, reduce, and monitor food loss and waste in Turkey. So what the numbers say in Turkey? Okay, we waste a lot of bread, unfortunately, and I think everyone knows in the room that, and our audiences, that we are one of the top 10 agriculture producers in the world and number one in Europe. So we are very well ahead of producing fresh fruits and vegetables, but they are also very perishable, and we waste almost half of them across the food chain. I'm going to touch upon the logistics issue, how we could handle this issue, but right now I'm trying to give you a clear picture, clear photo of the numbers in Turkey. So in 2020, according to the UNFCCC report, National Inventory Report of Turkey, which is updated every year, but the numbers coming 2 years ahead, 2 years behind, we waste 18.1 million tons of food. So the composition of the municipal waste, national municipal waste of Turkey, is 54% of it is food. So more than plastic, more than aluminum, more than foil, more than anything else, we waste food. So we need to tackle this issue. And I'm going to skip this part because both of the speakers have touched upon it. This is how we actually formulate our national strategy and its action plan. So this is our national strategy and action plan. Again, I would like to acknowledge Ms. Camelia Bucatoriu for her endless efforts for us to put this amazing guide for the first time in the history of Turkey. Of course, it has a background information. It is available in English and in Turkish. So you could just Google it and download it. And if you want to indulge it, have it, revise it, and adopt it to your national strategy, we will be more than pleased. Of course, it has cultural aspects, but most of the technical aspects are valid for other countries too. So we have the concept over there. We have goals and targets. We have almost hundreds of actions which are defined with the responsible players and also the partner players. And we hold like a very great, amazing, but hard, but good stakeholder consultation. We have sent every actor in the national food chain and get their feedbacks and comments and revise the documents. So it is a fully acceptable document. So far, we have begun the campaign like in 2020. So far, I haven't heard any feedback that this point was missing or you should have at this point. No, it's all on the right point. So the guide that you see in our screen, because I also saw that Professor Shane made a really great comment for the children, for our future, of course, for the world that we are stealing away from them. And I think today or tomorrow we're going to hit the 8 billion population. So we designed this guide. Actually, it is genderless. It is you cannot tell what kind of a fruit or a vegetable it is, but it's obvious that it's a kind of a live edible thing. So this is called Jano. We have it in the mascot costume, 2 of it, and we go to schools and events and everything with this guy. And we also have our social media accounts to reach the consumers, of course. So for the raising awareness, I'm going to touch it upon very fast because I want to move to the logistics. We have a communication toolkit, which is a downloadable PDF because our ministry has 81 provincial directorates. Turkey has 81 cities, and in each city, we have a provincial directorate, which is the power of us to reach the consumers. You can see in the screen that the billboards, the bus stations, the supermarkets, and everything. So we hold these events mostly voluntarily, and by their own resources to reach the consumers. We also have prepared flyers on the best before and use by dates. We run our social media accounts. We have an animation movie, thanks to FAO, which is amazing, to tell the kids the food system and why food shouldn't be wasted, actually. And we have gleaning activities with volunteer youth. So we glean the fields and donate them to the soup kitchens. And also we have Save Your Food Kitchen events with local common people to teach them food hygiene, food safety, but also how to reduce food waste at the household level. And we have 5 guidelines. One is on logistics, one is on HoReCa sector, one is for consumers. It has also an English version, this consumers guide, and one is for composting, and one is for the retail sector. So we have 5 Turkish, and some of them are available in English, guidelines which could be downloaded from our website, which is gıdanikoru.com. So we began the campaign in 2020 May, but before beginning it, we ran a household survey by an independent company, a phone survey all around Turkey, to see where we are on the context of food waste. And after that was a pretest. And after 1 year, we hold the same test again with the same questions, with additional 5 questions more about the campaign. That was a post-test. So results in 1 year, from May 2020 to May 2021, we saw that consumers started to waste less, and households saved around 80 million United States dollars. It is really huge to what we have spent and what we actually achieved with all this raising awareness campaign. And we also saw that 20% rise in awareness of date labeling, because in Turkey, I think it was 72% of the people doesn't know the difference between best before and use by date. That's the only 2 dates that we use on the food products, but they don't know the difference. But we saw a rise in that because of those brochures and communication we always do. And we broke 2 Guinness World Records. One is for, actually we use the Guinness World Records to increase the competition a little bit, but we had this on our web page, we had this very short paragraph. I'm not going to waste even a tiny bit of my food, a sip of my milk, I'm going to shop blend, etc. It's like it takes your 10 seconds. Actually, you put your name, you put your email, and then you have a certificate which you could share on social media. And with 790,000 pledges, we broke the most pledges received for an environmental sustainability campaign, and 881,000 pledges for the most pledges received for a campaign. So let me run through the logistics and tell you a bit more about the importance of logistics in the food supply chain. So there is risk at every stage of the food supply chain. Camelia mentioned it, Professor Shane had mentioned it, from food safety to food loss and waste. There are so many actors. So objective of the food supply chain management is to ensure safety and quality of food, so the consumers will consume what is produced for them. So what is involved in food supply chain? It's supply, of course, the processing of the food, and logistics of intermediate and final products. So it is really a hard job to run it effectively, but what is needed? Efficient communication. How much do you want? What date do you want? What product do you want? And all these issues had to be really carried by efficient communication. And you need to be adaptable to technological and scientific developments, which might be expensive, which might be cheap, but they need to be adopted. We have blockchain, everything, etc. So sky is the limit in logistics, and we should have efficient logistics management, of course. So I'm having trouble to, okay. So let's see why food loss occurs in logistics. In the upcoming speakers of this very amazing conference, we're going to hear that the product by food loss occurs, etc. But for a general view, the time between production, transportation, and consumption causes food loss and waste. And improper vehicle loading and unloading methods, of course, poor packaging, of course, long shipping processes, road structures, and not being able to cool before loading, especially for the perishable products. It is really, really important. And sometimes even the driver doesn't even care for the loss of the products. So what to consider in the vehicle? So what we should do, actually. We should transport the product, of course, at its standard temperature. We should measure it. Pre-cooling is amazing before loading the goods into the vehicle. And we need to place the goods in such way to facilitate air circulation. And we need to unload it quickly. So these are all on the screen, which will be, as I saw in the chat, which will be uploaded to be read and refer later. So what do we have in Turkey, actually? The legal regulations in Turkish Food Codex. Of course, we want to be a member to the European Union, so we align our laws and regulations with European Union laws and regulations. So what we have this quick frozen food stuff. I believe that most of the countries also have, but it is for the quick frozen food stuff, which is fixed minus 18 degrees or lower, and this temperature has to be maintained because of the food safety reasons. And there are like some specific qualifications for some specific products, and it is all set in the law and regulations. So also we have food hygiene laws, and what we have also this HACCP, the hazard analysis and critical control points all around Turkey in the trucks. These are controlled, and how the food is handled is controlled. We had run a very recent and important project funded by European Union on transport of the perishable foodstuff. So the beneficiary was the Turkish Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure, and the scope was to strengthen the enforcement capacity of the Ministry of Transport of the perishable foodstuff. So the question what was asked over there, can we apply feasibly ATP rules to fresh fruits and vegetables internally? So I think you know all ATP, and I also don't trust my French very well to say it in French, but I put the French acronym for ATP. Most of the countries are applying it, especially it's really good and important for exporting goods. And the objective of ATP is to improve conditions of preservation of quality and perishable foodstuff during carriage, and to expand in international trade and ensure food safety. So applying ATP to domestic perishable foodstuff, in this project, there was a run for the feasibility test. So the result was like this. It depends on the product. For tomato, for example, the investment that you're going to make to carry the tomatoes all in the cold chain, not only in transportation. I need to really underline that, because it makes no sense, also increases the food loss when you apply cold chain in some certain stage of the food supply chain. No, you shouldn't do it. For tomato, if you're going to do it, you should follow the cold chain from the harvesting to the retail, to the supermarket or whatever it is. For tomato, it is a no, because value of lost tomatoes divided by cold chain cost, it's below 1. It has to be like below 130, 150 almost. For peach, yes, it worth the investment. So you could invest in the cold chain applications for carrying, for logistics of the peach, because the number is 1.66. So the result, it is not feasible to apply cold chain only for transportation, as I underlined, why you cannot only apply only for logistics, only for transportation, or even after harvesting, like you put in the like temperature controlled containers, and then afterwards you load it to an uncontrolled truck. No, you cause a very bad effect on the loss of the food quality. So there must be a holistic approach in this if you're going to follow this rule. So I would like to thank you very much. And as other participants, I'm going to follow up the meeting, because I'm really eager to learn about this specific product by product, how they're handling the things. And I will be at your service to answer your questions and everything. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Many thanks for sharing your specific experience and the experience of Turkey. And it's great to see how this concrete cooperation between an international organization like FAO and the country, all the results this can yield. And I would say congratulations for the success of your campaign. You've shown us the impact data, you've shown us the marketing mascot, and count one more, I'm going to revisit my fridge tonight. It's also very interesting what you've said about logistics. The sky is the limit for logistics. And I think here that's an area that is of great interest to us in UNECE. If I'm not mistaken, that convention you mentioned, I'm wondering whether that's not a convention also handled by our colleagues in the transport division in UNECE. So maybe that's scope for cooperation here. And in the trade division, we've been really looking in terms of transport and logistics of how to make supply chains more efficient, also by digitalizing the data that flows along the supply chain. So maybe that's an area to explore where the trade facilitation team, but also the teams from the transport division can join hands a little bit to together support better this very important objective of reducing food loss and waste. So many thanks, Zeynep, for this really practical and super interesting presentation as well. Now we're going to move from the southern part of the pan-European UNECE region to the more northern part, and great pleasure to invite Christina Mattsson, who is agricultural policy analyst at the Swedish Board of Agriculture. And Christina, you know us very well here in UNECE and Working Party 7, and you've been with us and on our side for many years. So very excited to hear your presentation and your comments on what has been said before. Thank you for being with us. The floor is yours, Christina.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Ah, good. Yes, and thank you for the very interesting presentations. And you're going to see that what I said actually fits in with what has been said before. What I'm going to talk about is what we've done in the UNECE, where we have elaborated a code of good practice for handling fruit and vegetables. And the aim of this has been to reduce food losses and waste. The work has been carried out in 2 stages. We first developed one, and here I'd like to thank countries like Poland, Netherlands, Spain, France, Germany for their active contribution in that. And we then had a code that was mainly applicable to countries where a lot of high technology is available in the markets. And we wanted to have a code that could also be applied on markets with less technology. And it was decided to do that in the existing one instead of developing a separate one. And I was afraid, because I thought that, yes, I thought it would be difficult to have one for all markets, but we still decided to do it in one code. And I'm really happy we did that, because I think the outcome was very good, much better than it would have been with 2 separate ones. And I'd like to send a big thanks to the US, Brazil, South Africa, also the FAO who has participated in this, as well as Spain and France. It's been a lot of work, and they've been really good in supporting this work. We can take the next one. It goes without saying that this connects to the UN Sustainability Goal 12.3. So I think we can continue. Now, the guidelines go all the way from production to retailer. They start at the farm level, but it doesn't include cultivation measures. That would have increased the scope so much that I don't think we would have ever gone out of that. So we started harvest, or you can say we started ordering, and then go all the way into the retailer. And it's the professional level, so we're not including consumer aspects. Yes, next one. So, all the stages going up to the retailer, and yeah, we can take the next one. So, who is the code written for? Well, it's written for professional handlers, the primary producers at harvesting, packing, cooling, sorting, etc., but also planning. It's for traders, importers, exporters, buyers, wholesalers. We have one section for transporters. We have for retailers, and they've all got the chapter each. Yes. Next one. It's applicable in all countries now and on all types of markets. And one thing that we have decided to do is that we have one chapter for each segment. So the chapter on with the recommendations to transporters stands by itself, so that the transporter should not have to look at the other sections for certain kind of recommendations. But everything that concerns a transporter should be in this chapter, and the retailer should have everything that concerns the retailer in their chapter. If some of them are similar, so you could say there is a certain amount of repetition, but it's each adapted to the specificities that you find in each part of the food chain. So if we talk about cooling, it's adapted to the different sections. At producer level, it's important to have pre-cooling, as Turkey was talking about, pre-cooling, and then when you have established the beginning of the cold chain and a low temperature, you need to keep the low temperature throughout it. And it should be applicable in all countries and all types of markets. Hopefully, we've done all we can to make sure that. Yes. And how does the guidelines work? Well, it's guidelines and recommendations. Yep, next one. And what kind of recommendations? Now we're getting to the key point. Yes. Next one. So in the different chapters, we have some themes that come back. The training of staff is one important aspect. With training, you of course increase the knowledge of the staff that handle fruit and vegetables. And I'd like to say that a fruit or a vegetable is a living organism. It's not like a bottle of water. It has specific requirements that vary between the different fruit and vegetables. And it will react to bad treatment. How? By rapidly deteriorating, losing its attraction to the potential customer. And therefore, it will also lose its value. So there's money involved in here as well. And the more staff knows about the specific requirements, the better the company can retain product value and decrease losses and waste. So knowledge is a key to doing the right thing all through the chain. From careful handling at harvest, pre-cooling, proper placing and display in the shops, what products can be displayed together, etc., etc. Knowledge is the key to all this. Yeah, thank you. Next one. Planning. We've heard it also before today. Planning is vital. You need to plan product to demand. you need to plan ordered volumes to demand. We've talked about different logistics. And you need to plan an unbroken cool chain. And here comes another word that we've heard before as well, and that is communication. For the planning to work throughout the chain, you need to have a good communication and a shared responsibility. Yes, planning goes through all the other advice as well, because you need to plan it so that it's working together. And so we put quite a lot of effort into this chapter. Yes, next one. I'm not going to say so much about this because I think everyone knows that careful handling is so important. We all see the effects of rough handling of sensitive products. For example, peaches, nectarines, plums, and how quickly the products can deteriorate, how the bruises grow in certain products. So careful handling goes all the way through the chain. Yeah. We're talking also about temperature, and temperature is the most important parameter that will decide the shelf life of fruit and vegetables, because temperature decides the rate of senescence. Depending on what you have available, it's the best thing is with rapid cooling and maintaining an unbroken cool chain. If you haven't got that, you need to use what you have, use the shade, use something to cover products, to lower the impact of the sun, and do what you can to keep them in as low a temperature as possible. And with the temperature that they is suitable for them, because there are products that are sensitive to lower temperature. That has to be taken into account, of course. So we're talking a lot about temperature in the different stages. Yes, we have then. Next one. Yes, ordering. Ordering is about placing the right volumes, but it's also about placing it what we call in a timely manner, because you should allow the producer the time to cool the products properly. And the same goes for if you change the order. The producer must be able to cool the products properly, to pack them without too much haste, because then they will bruise. Cancellations. What do you do with a cancellation if you've taken your apples out of a store with controlled atmosphere because you can't put them back? Or you have a product with very short shelf life. In addition, we're talking about clear specifications, because in the specifications, the buyer makes clear what he wants. And with the clear specifications, you avoid the misunderstandings that could lead to returns and the wasted product. So clear specification and appropriate maturity requirements are vital in this. So yes. I think this picture says it all, doesn't it? Do your stacking and packaging for transportation properly. And you avoid these kinds of accidents. In addition, it's actually quite good to have the responsibilities clarified. If everybody knows who's responsible of what, you reduce the incentive. You increase the incentive to do things right. So make sure you got the responsibilities clarified. Yeah. In display and promotion, we are saying that you should continue the general handling in a proper way, as you've done before. It's again about temperature. It's about respecting the shelf life limits. And then we have put the word responsible campaigns. If producers have a surplus of a certain crop, of course, a campaign can help to alleviate perhaps the surplus. But we should know that if you encourage the consumer to buy more than he or she had planned, he's going to buy less of something else. And perhaps in the end, he's going to throw away some products at home. And if they buy less of something else, the store may be sitting with that something else unsold. So the best thing to avoid food and waste is actually not to have too big campaigns, but to have a steady supply of fruit at the retail level. And we discourage buy two, pay for one. It is not appropriate for products with a short shelf life. Yep. Whatever you do, if you have a retail store, you're going to sit sometimes with products that you need to find an alternative outlet for. Depending on the reason, if it's just oversupply, you're going to have marketable products of good quality. So then you can have one kind of outlet. But if the reason is that you're sitting with lower category products with perhaps exterior defects, then you may need another one. It could be non-conformities found at delivery for some reason, which needs a kind of outlet, or products that have remained unsold at retail level. They're marketable, but perhaps have lost some freshness. So you need to play with a few different possible outlets, depending on the reason for it. And then we have one final slide, which is about measuring. Measuring, of course, tells you what goes well and what goes wrong. But it also increases the awareness and knowledge. So we encourage measuring throughout the chain. With that knowledge, you can have targeted measures to come to terms with the problems of waste and losses. You can see the money that is involved in this, and you can see profitability. Yes. And that was the end. So that's what we've been working with, and thank you for listening.
Many thanks, Christina, and really my appreciation to you for sharing all your knowledge and insights. And you've been, I think you've also been chairing the group that developed the code, so one can really sort of like see that, how closely involved you are. And so my appreciation for that, as well as to the member states who you listed, who kind of have contributed to that as well. Found very interesting at the end when you said like measurement, so we can also see the money on it. So it's not only for the common good, but it's also a question of economic efficiency. Thank you, Christina. Now we do have a little bit of a timing problem here today. I'm maybe not using my prerogative as a chair as I should, but we have another 30 minutes to now really bring this discussion to the chairs of our specialized sections. And we have all four lined up. And we invite to the podium, of course, Dorian, please do join us. I think we start with the first specialized section, focusing on fresh fruits and vegetables. And we've seen beautiful pictures of lots of fresh fruit and vegetables in these past slides. So I guess it's perfectly fine to first give the floor to Cyril Julius, who is the chair of the specialized section on standardization of fresh fruits and vegetables in UNECE. And Cyril, just for the sake of time, please do calibrate your intervention in a way that we can hear from all 4 chairs. And with that, I'd ask the take team to give the floor to Cyril. We can see you already. Let's see whether we can hear you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yes, Chair, thank you. And I will be brief in the interest of time. I would like to start by thanking the speakers today. They provided some valuable insights and into what is being done around the world and the tools available to use to combat food loss and waste. And it's also interesting to note what other countries like Turkey are doing and what is the thinking out there. I am the chair of the specialized section on fresh fruit and vegetables, and we are in the business of creating quality standards. But we also have now ventured into food loss and prevention, and the code of practice that Christina presented. It is one of the tools that we have currently in our toolbox to that end. But this code has also now been enriched with 4 leaflets that we discussed also yesterday. This has to do with floral vegetables, immature fruit and vegetables, leafy vegetables, and then also root vegetables. And as the specialized section, we are currently also scrutinizing our standard layout and the quality standards to see if there are clauses that can contribute to food loss, food waste. And this work is currently ongoing. But I would like to share something from an exporting country perspective. I am from South Africa, and we export quite a good amount of fruit to more than 100 countries around the world. And we believe that prevention of food loss and waste is everyone's business, from the producer to the packer, the exporter, all the supply chain role players, and even to the consumer, and also those like us who are administering standards. Now, exporting countries like South Africa produce usually more than we can use, so we have to export. And also we are quite far from the market. South Africa is about 3 weeks by vessel from the market, and we just have to ship our produce under refrigeration. So the producers make sure that they produce a good quality and to the best of their ability, and that is to maximize their returns, but also at the same time to prevent food loss and waste. The more that is lost, that affects their sustainability at the end of the day. So for them, food loss prevention and waste is paramount, and they know exactly what is required in terms of the classes, class extra, class 1 and class 2, and they produce according to that. But something very alarming that we notice is that, and I'm glad that most of the speakers touched on temperature management. And this is where we see currently a lot of waste.
Cyril, we have lost you acoustically. It worked perfectly well before, but suddenly you were gone. Maybe the tech team can help us here. Now you seem to be muted, Cyril. Unmute yourself and try again, please. No. Okay. Unfortunately, very unfortunately, it would have been great to hear a little bit more about the temperature management that we were just discussing. Let us maybe do the following. If you try once again, Cyril, and If not, we go through the other speakers and we take you at the end, and maybe you can reinitiate your settings. Can you try? No. Okay, let us do the following. It was great to hear that 4 leaflets were discussed yesterday, and that the standard layout key is sort of being revisited from the perspective of food loss and waste. And now we were just at the point of temperature management here. Maybe we move to the podium where we have just welcomed Dorian Lafont. Now, Dorian, you are the chair of the specialized section on standardization of dry and dried produce. Maybe you can share your insights, and that should technologically definitely work.
Thank you very much. Though I'm the chair of the specialized section on dry and dried produce, based on all the data we have reviewed, dry and dried produce has among the lowest levels of food waste, food loss in the entire agricultural production sector of about 0.5%. However, it is, for me, I think it's best if I let one of the industry top experts address this issue, because I would like to make greater use of Mr. Pino Calgani to address this issue from the industry perspective, because it brings us into the practical realm. Thank you. Pino?
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Of course, I'm talking for account of the International Nut Council and the right fruit. So it is a very limited sector, very important for many of the producer, farmers, collectors, processor, and mainly the 5 continents consumer. We are monitoring very carefully from the field to the fork. Of course, I appreciate quite a lot all the presentation and the master lesson of Professor Ward and all the other presentation from Camelia and from Zainab and Christina. Let's split. On production side, 5 continents, hazelnuts, walnuts, almonds, macadamia, pecan, and also Brazil nuts, pine nuts, and they have a kind of a loss which should not be considered in this moment because we are talking of the second part of the chain. But I can anticipate that the climate change create during the 21 and 22 terrible damage represented by fire, represented by the drones, represented by flooding. And we are considering that for the sector, we lost more than 300,000 metric tons and involving in the forest for more than 10,000 hectares. So practically very important damage. If we do not consider the reduced value, and that is a question point to this to our meeting, that the drought and the overflooding they created in terms of quality at the origin because not proper drying and the facility of logistic. Then we move to the consumer side. Consumer side, I am glad to tell you, and for consumer, we are considering also the processing industry, which arrived to the consumer. We have almost zero loss, zero waste before going to the fridge. But we don't go often to the fridge because we are nuts and dried fruit. The wastage that we consider, it is mainly caused by logistic delay, which is becoming quite important recently, but the industry is self or recycling the shell, the husk, and of course the package, which at a certain moment is coming. And we are utilizing quite a lot as field amendments or for hay for animals, and mainly burning all the shell and the skin. The skin are excellent for animal feed because they are extremely rich of fiber and protein. Then we go to a final point, the consumer. I appreciate that very often the best before it is a killing point, which is totally unnecessary. So that is the two interests of retailers to sell faster, but technically giving 9 months or 12 months for the product packed in a fantastic controlled atmosphere doesn't make any change. But the day of the best before, the product's value is becoming zero. But it is just one point to consider in the code of practice. I don't take too much of your time. The biofuel, I understand, is quite important. That is only working for the cashew. The cashew nuts is very important because they are mainly produced in Africa, but they are moved to Far East, Vietnam, India, and Brazil to be processed. At my age, it is only 40 years that I say how stupid we are. We are producing in one continent, we are moving to another 3 continents, and then we bring back another 2 continents to be utilized. But that is the industry. So practically for the time being, we are as it is. Thank you very much for your time.
For both speakers, and I've learned a lot now. I hadn't thought about the dry and dried fruit relationship to food waste and loss. So many thanks for the very enlightening remarks here as well. And now if we start questioning the value chains, we get into a huge philosophical discussion, which maybe at some point we will be having. Let us now move to seed potatoes. And I understand Ms. Hannah Cortema is with us online, and she's the chair of the specialized section on standardization of seed potatoes. Let's see whether we manage to bring Hannah.
Okay,
yeah,
hello. Thank you for the opportunity to tell about how it goes in seed potatoes. And I was happy that our first speaker, Professor Ward, mentioned this agri-food chain, because I think when we are talking about seed potatoes, the many things are happening in a farm level, but of course it goes the chain through the chain up to the consumer. And I think potato is easy because everyone knows potatoes. It is very important crop, but like many crops, even 1/3 of the crop is lost owing to diseases and pests. And if you use high quality seed potatoes, then you improve the quality of the yield and minimize the production losses. But it is very important to have the seed certification system, and the benefits of certification system of seed potatoes are many. For example, having this system, you ensure that you have the right variety and good quality, and then the farmer is able to produce a successful crop and save the environment. Produce a successful crop and high yield. And if you are using certified seed potatoes, you have less pests and diseases, and that lower the production losses in growing crop, and also in a storage of potatoes. And if you have this certification system of seed potatoes, you also improve the plant health, and that limits the use of pesticides, and that's a way to save the environment. And when we are talking about seed potato, there is also always a possibility that the crop or lot doesn't meet the certification tolerances, but these potatoes can be used for other purposes, such food industry, starch production, animal feed, biogas production, and so on. So the seed potato is no waste. It can be used for other purposes. And I think that the UNEC standard on seed potatoes is the only international comprehensive standard for seed potato certification, and it is a very useful tool. So when we are setting up an efficient system for certification and for marketing the high quality seed potatoes, as it is promoted by UNEC specialized section, it contributes to a sustainable potato production and indirectly contributes to the reduction of food loss and waste. So thank you. This was for seed potatoes. Thank you.
Many thanks, Hannah. So in essence, here we see an example where the quality of the seed potato actually helps us avoid waste and loss much further down the production process. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And we get to the fourth specialized section, and that's the specialist section of meat. Ian King, and I think, Ian, we did discuss certain circular economy related aspects in the last session of the specialized section, but if you kindly now also share your thoughts here on this particular issue of food loss and waste, the floor is yours. I can see you on the small screen, but you're muted.
Unmute. Okay, thank you.
Visible.
Thank you. I'll be as brief as I can, and I realize we're running out of time. I think the points that I would just reflect to is first, meat in general. If you're not careful, you associate meat as being meat or being the same. The logistics, the cold chain, the requirements for white meats, chicken, ducks versus red meats are quite specific and quite different. From a UNEC perspective, in terms of the specifications, we've tended to remain with the quality aspects, and we've used in the meat sector, because it's been entrenched in the cold chain requirements for so many years, the regulators, what we call importing country requirements, transportation, the cold chain has been an issue that has been addressed over and over again. It needs to be addressed over and over again because there are risks. There are risks at airports, there are risks at shipping ports, that you will break that cold chain. So I mentioned briefly yesterday a couple of innovations or interventions, if you like, that have been implemented around providing data and information, particularly of product and around product labeling, to avoid delays. Because one of the issues that is risk is that the minute product arrives on the wharf, you need to expedite the customs clearance or the inspection process, and much of that's around labeling of product, and frequently there are rejections and delays. So as part of that, I mentioned yesterday in the meat section briefly about meat messaging, which has been developed specifically between Australia and the United States, but is a model that will no doubt roll out where the information is provided digitally, and so that when product arrives, obviously all that information around labeling has been addressed, and the product can effectively flow straight into the system. So people have mentioned logistics. Of course, there's an interesting study on India specifically around the meat sector. And that's available. It was done by a group of people in Hong Kong. But fundamentally, again, there are issues around packaging and about, I guess, ensuring that product is maintained and preserved appropriately. And again, logistics comes up in regards to the availability of containers, particularly refrigerated containers, and then data logs and systems to monitor that. So fundamentally, the meat industry has its own issues, but it has been addressing that cold chain issue for a number of years. And whilst at the UNEC level, we haven't specifically gone about and put in the code of practice for that, we have identified within the standards the need to follow importing country requirements around those issues. I'd also just like to briefly say, I was very interested in the first speaker about land use, about resources, and about the issues around agri-feed, if you like, and the purpose by which land use is used, and particularly from produced primary foods. I think people forget that. And I was interested about, we're connected to oil. And again, consumers forget about that. They just think, well, if we eliminate this and eliminate that, we're going to solve the issue. But guess what? We may not have any food, but we haven't really thought that through. So I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done. But also we need to be open and honest, and the word measurements come up many times. We need to measure our systems and measure our improvements. So I understand that we really are running out of time. So rather than go on, I think from my point of view, our section will continue to monitor and stay close to food waste. It's really important. One of the issues I should just dwell on for a moment, food waste in Australia, specifically at the moment, is being created by the lack of labour. A lot of fruit and produce is remaining on trees and not being picked. Meat products, in turn, are not being saved to their true value because we just simply do not have at the moment the labour force to add value or to create, to ensure that the valued cuts are going to the right markets. So thank you.
Definitely the meat sector has huge complexities as well, and it's great to know that the specialized section will sort of continue looking at the topic and as you said, having a good discussion about it and an open-minded discussion about it is surely much appreciated. Also note that the importance of measuring so that we actually know what we are discussing. Let us try to bring Cyril back, whether we want to maybe just give a quick try. He's not connected anymore. Okay, so with this, I would say we've had really rich discussion. We are sort of on time, back on time. We have been monitored. We don't see any immediate burning question from the audience, the online audience, which has stayed with us. Many thanks. Everybody actually stayed with us for the whole 2 hours. And I think that really shows the importance of the issue, the complexity of the issue, and the value of being exposed to a lot of information. Let me look to the room here to see whether anybody has a burning issue who would like to share. I know we are standing now between us and the lunch here in Geneva. I see no flag going up in the room here. So I would maybe close it here without any attempt to summarize. But before I give the floor back to the chair and the vice chair also, who will say a few closing remarks, I understand, no? I felt it's been really, really interesting. I definitely have learned so much, and it was lovely to review the academic perspective, providing this huge systems overview with some maybe controversial messages that surely will require a bit more discussion. And then hearing from FAO, and FAO has such a richness of information, data and tools out there. And we looked at the concrete application of some of these tools. We saw what Turkey actually could do with some of the tools in cooperation with FAO. So that's really something we as international organizations should carry forward and see that that we work together with our countries to use and implement these tools. And I very much appreciated Christina being with us from the Swedish Board of Agriculture, but also very much as the person who was the driving force and sort of like the convener again, behind this code of good practice. And it's been a wonderful opportunity for me to go through it and to be like learning about it. Greatly appreciated the 4 comments, and obviously maybe food loss and waste is most relevant for fresh fruits and vegetables, most intuitive, but amazing interactions from a circular economy perspective also when it comes to dry and dried fruits, and maybe that's something we can think of in terms of developing further with our Central Asian partners and countries where dry and dried fruits are really one of the key and important export products as well. And seed potatoes, surely more to discuss, as well as meat as well. And with that, Bucky, I would maybe hand over to you for your summary and closing remarks here.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I would like to take just a few moments to maybe summarize a few things, some themes I heard, and close this very important roundtable out. Many of you may be like me, but when I was a kid, I was constantly told to clean my plate. There was somebody starving somewhere in the world. And, you know, that's a responsibility, I think. And I've carried that forward in my personal life and tried to teach my kids not to waste, not just food, but anything, any valuable resource. So it is important. And for me, looking at all these speakers, some large themes come to mind. Number one, we obviously need to continue to put forth effort to reduce food loss and waste. But we need to have very large actionable focus, right? We need to make sure we're putting the resources in the right places to make the biggest impact we can. One of the large themes I heard throughout this, and one that I know is very important, are policy and health and safety regulations in different countries, whether it be local, regional, state, or national. Examples, you know, preventing donation of raw or leftover prepared foods. There's many regulations that can prevent that. There's issues with food fraud, mislabeling, branded products, economic adulteration. Those are areas that are really important to be able to not waste those types of foods and utilize those downstream. Another very important one that keeps coming up is logistics and cold chain. That's critical. In fact, that is one of the biggest factors in the United States for food loss and food waste. So it is a very, very, very important. Another one is, you know, continuing to use technology and innovation to extract value from waste streams. It's very important that we capture as many nutrients, as many valuable products as we can to prevent those from going to the landfill. And then obviously the obvious one, right, the big elephant in the room, is to continue to use innovation and technology to solve many of these problems. And that's going to be very important on 2 levels. One is to get the adequate funding for those types of projects, but being very clear on priorities and focus for those products. Money is tight in a lot of economies. We've got issues with recession and energy and all kinds of factors going to take money from those efforts, but it's critically important. In particular, as it relates to the harvest technologies, production technologies, packaging, those types of things. Those will really help us minimize downstream waste. So with that, I would thank everyone and the speakers for outstanding presentation. And I think that will close the session. And thank you very much for your participation.